Hello and welcome to another edition of the Martech conversations between Dorai Thodla and Pravin Shekar. Hi, Dorai.
Hey, Praveen.
Uh, Good. Influencers, which is what we were discussing earlier. And
Yeah,
let's continue in the same vein.
sure.
How would you like to start?
Yeah, I think, you know, we talk about the term influencers. There are, opinion leaders, right? Like people, experts.
Yes,
There are many of these kind. But generally, people who listens and other people listen to or look for advice, and they
right.
don't have to explicitly give an advice. They say, "Hey, take a look," and they may do this. Um, I'll start with the story, but before I do that, I want to know. So we've been having this discussion for some time.
Right.
I made some assumptions about, what will you do with these experts and influence leaders and all. But I want to know. Let us start this thing about end in mind, right? So once you locate them, I mean, what is your? I mean, why do you want the influencers?
Right.
Why do you want to connect with them? Opinion leaders, influencers. We'll use the term influencers.
Right.
How? What exactly? Do you want to do? Because it takes a long time you may know them, but for them to get to know you and then positively respond to any of your messages and things like that, even an invitation to speak and things like that takes time. So what is the why do you want to connect with these people?
Right. So I'm responding as a marketer and as an entrepreneur here, Dorai.
Yeah.
So if I want to know a little bit more or a lot more of a particular topic, I need to know who has already done quite a bit of work in this aspect, either creating, collating, or curating relevant content specific to what I am looking for. And my primary purpose here is purely gathering the knowledge, absorbing it in terms of who are the right people to follow for this kind of a topic. So let me give a practical example. We wanted to host a global referral summit, and we wanted to come up with a whole lot of influencers who talk and work in the word of mouth area, building referral engines, recommendation engines, and word of mouth. So we looked across and found out, hey, who has spoken, who has written, who has consistently contributed or covered or researched in that topic. And then we brought it down to about 40, 50 people and then invited them over for a series of mini interviews, primarily for us to learn a lot more. There was no hard selling involved. There was no, hey, will you market it involved. It was purely as a student and trying to interact and learn a lot more, Dorai. And that is how I would look at most of the influencers here, primarily to learn. And through this osmosis, there is a transfer that happens. There is a transfer of some of my knowledge goes back to the key influencer, or in certain cases, I become a vehicle through which their message reaches the people that I am an influencer for, or my small circle. Um, as for example, down south, marketing and sales are used interchangeably and completely mixed. So the minute we talk about influencer, the mind automatically goes to influencer marketing. Oh, these guys are paid, but that is not at all the primary purpose. To use um, a term, I would call it the bastardization of the entire influencer part for certain ulterior motives. And even if you have to look at marketing, as a pure marketer, I would look at making positive change happen. And that is the intent of marketing. And from what you told in the earlier interaction conversation that we had, right, that the influencers don't keep count. Their job is they get a good night's sleep if they have communicated that message to a whole lot. And have I received it? Have I got it through? And I'm also going to connect to something else you said, Dorai, that in 2006 you started blogging and you were blogging consistently for quite some time until it broke off. But whatever you have contributed and the group that you have built up, you continue to influence, even though blog may not be your primary source of influencing now. You've shifted over to Twitter and the like. So starting with the end in mind, purely for a relationship, purely to see, hey, I have learned how else can I contribute? And through these summits and the interviews, I help in getting their message across to a lot of people. So and during the course, all the people who have interviewed and stayed in touch with, right, understand what I am doing or what my business is. And therefore, a whole lot of referrals, recommendations keep coming in. Hey, if it is this, you should talk to Praveen. If it is this, you should talk to Praveen. And that was never the motive at all, but purely, through the relationship, through continuous engagement, positive value adding engagement, we tend to stay top of mind.
Yeah.
So does that answer your question?
Yeah, perfect. I mean, this is really good because I think this is the right way to start. Because whenever somebody connects with you or send you a connect request on LinkedIn, you're worried that the next request is going to be pitching a product to you or something like that. So, in fact, many of the LinkedIn, even the suggestions are this, that hey, say upfront that I read your blog post, I read your book, I listened to your, listen to you being interviewed in a podcast or your podcast, and I really like this aspect. So I want to, I can simply follow you and get the information, but I also want to interact with you because I have certain interesting, opinions about these kinds of things and, some questions and I noticed that you contribute a lot, and then that really helps, so let us continue the path that we saw we were talking about a little bit in the previous episode. Is that um writers are influencers, obviously,
Yes.
because they've done enormous amount of research. In fact, um, there are writers, there are people who researched material for writers who turned into writers later, and then they learned all the methods by which writers gather information. And you yourself know, as a person who has written
Yeah.
some books, the amount of research you do and the amount of
Yeah.
material you discard and filter on behalf of the user, and then present the most relevant, information to them. And is but what about all the other information that you collected? That is useful too, and it
Yes.
comes out in some ways in like in blogs or tweets and that kind of stuff. And so they're wealth of information because they soak themselves, for a year or two or whatever period they spent, writing the book, or the idea, comes up sometime and then slowly grows, and you keep gathering information and all that sort of stuff. So we'll talk about the path to discovery, right? Writers, speakers, we talked about, because the invited speakers, especially chief guests or keynote speakers, and even panels,
Right.
panelists, they're all because they're invited because they're experts in that space. VCs are, and because they're
Yes.
fund companies, and VCs are kind of an interesting twist because in some ways they are lagging indicators, but in some way because of the risk and all that sort of stuff they way. But some ways they're leading indicators. Some of the early stage investors like angels and pre-seed and all that, they take a bet. Some of them take a bet on the team, but some of them also take a bet on a space being developed, marketed. Like imagine people who invested in Facebook when Facebook did not even have a business model.
Right.
Facebook itself did not know the business model, right? Same thing with Google. It took a few years before they came up with the business model, but people still invested in them, right? Think about all of them. In some cases, it's the people. So investors have very interesting angles because they talk to others and they know where the industry is going, and they project. And this is a term that I got from Doug Engelbert, saying that if you if you take a basic idea, there are different dimensions along which it can grow.
Mhm.
For example, if you looked at smartphones 5 years ago, okay, they were great means of communication, and people expected to text. Getting better, and they're the primary device with which people take pictures now. And then there's a whole host of new applications came in because these pictures can be edited, can be made better instead of taking it to another place and doing it and all that sort of stuff. And then the processing power, the memory, the storage, and everything started becoming more and more. And then it started connecting to the cloud. So there is a whole and they see these dimensions, and the people who do some of these research, they look at different angles, and some of them may pay off and some of them may not, but they look at different dimensions in which certain things
Right.
can grow. and both positive and negative, for example. And so now we are in a situation of the COVID, and there is this, revolutionary RNA-based, and but that it's not something that came up in 1 year's time. And the research was
Yeah.
going on much earlier. Gates Foundation and others have been investing in it, and it just turns out that so all of a sudden there's a problem that came up for which all the research some of the, can be taken and applied, and then you can come up with this. So the influences of early investors in very, very interesting technology. So there are, so and then there are some non-obvious ones: speakers, writers, bloggers, tweeters to some extent. They're all curators of all kinds, columnists. They're the faces we see, you know. But there are people who sit on the panels of conferences to select papers,
Right.
right? So these are the kind of invisible. They don't speak.
Right.
They're not the one who are organizing the panel. There are a bunch of experts saying that. So for me, if I want to look at a leading indicator, let us say in a medical devices or an IoT or an artificial intelligence, what I look at is I look at all the papers that are being submitted.
Yeah.
Then I also look at all the papers that are selected, and because it has to align with the theme of the conference.
Right.
Okay, and then what is it that they know that we don't know that made them select these papers, and then those papers become uh, get the visibility, and then there are a lot of papers. I mean, the part of it is like a very typical publishing process, like the Google search algorithm, page rank kind of thing. Is that if a paper is cited a lot, and then they'll bring in those themes to talk about where it is going to go, where the research is going to go, the next steps of the research kind of thing. So researchers are influencers, and they surface in very interesting ways, and they're not your normal, people that you can see them. In fact, I noticed that some of the best experts in fields, they don't blog, they don't tweet, and if you look at the websites, they're terrible, from design point of view. It's just a blank page in which they put text. But if you go there to the page, it's a list of papers they submitted, list of research projects they worked on, list
Right.
of PhD, research they led, influenced all the kind of stuff. And then you look at in US, there is this thing called National Science Foundation. National Science Foundation it funds research. Department of Defense funds research also. When you look at the research being funded in a certain space, you come to know this research belongs to the public. That means you can actually go and take that information, and they have to submit a proposal, and they can follow it up and all that. But there are different levels of funding that they get, and you look at those fundings, and that gives you a leading indicator of what are the areas in which there are problems that exist and people are researching. And so there are all these methods of finding. So now that I told you these are all the methods by which you can find, the tools are very simple, right? You can start with a very simple, some of them are visible in the web because they show up. Some of them, because they don't have a great page rank, they may not come in the first result. They may be hiding in the 100th page, in which case you may not see it, and you need to go figure out a way to unearth them kind of stuff. And so you do something very specific. What you do is you do what are called site searches. Like, for example, if there is a conference, pick a conference for medical, or for there is a conference for data science conference, open data science. There's a conference. O'Reilly runs a bunch of conferences. So if I go through the conference proceedings, sometimes they are priced, but the abstracts are available in all of them. So if I go to that site and look at that abstracts and start doing searches deeper down, they're not, they don't surface in your normal Google search, and that is the way you can go and find the information. And then you find the authors. Then you go and see these authors, how many times they are cited, and how much research they have influenced. And this way you can go and find the gems that are hidden gems in the field. And then some of them interact, some of them do not interact. Not everybody writes books, but there is a way you can, if they're a college professor or something, you can request a call. And most of them are not even on LinkedIn, because everybody thinks LinkedIn is a business network. And so most of
Right.
the academicians, initially LinkedIn, in fact, everybody thought it was an employment network. LinkedIn changed quite a bit since that time. They will definitely not be on Facebook because it's a very different type of network. And many of them are actually popping up on Twitter, which is kind of interesting. But they also appear in many of these mailing lists. So, and they're very, very dedicated mailing lists. These are in subreddits, in Reddit, for example. And these are things, they may sound geeky, but you know that the subreddit on stocks, had a huge influence, right? In the last 1 or 2 weeks, they were like taking a lot of people, short sellers to cleaners, right? Um, so there are a lot of sources which are public, but not so visible. And when you,
Beautiful.
the more niche market you go to, the deeper you go to, the the more you need to use these techniques to go and find them. And you can also do that. So normally what I do is, so we have built, kind of experimenting with a research tool called a topic tracker. It's called a
Right.
research assistant and influence finder and all that. And one thing we noticed is that, uh, let us say I want to research on medical devices. Okay. I want to go a little bit deeper and say, I can say continuous monitoring devices. They are very special. There are certain technologies that are required to be continuous monitoring of temperature, glucose levels, blood oxygen levels, all these kinds of
Right.
things. We know why they are needed now, with all these kinds of things. And so we want to go and find out who are the influencers, there are some manufacturers, there are, some funded research inside the organizations, a lot of funded research outside, because government is very interested in doing this kind of stuff. So there are a whole bunch of government sites. And in US there is this, again, this is small business administration, grants, like they give away like $5 million, $10 million grants to small research for small businesses, for going and experimenting with some of these kinds of things. So first you need to get a compilation of a lot of these in your niche, find out all the places where you are likely to find these people. So I would go and look for a subreddit, is there a channel, or is there a special interest group, and where it may be very small, it won't be only 10 people or 20 people initially, kind of thing, but a lot of intense discussions. And then mailing lists, which are before all these social networks became popular, kind of thing. So what I see as social networks is the tip of the iceberg, where very surface level conversations take place. They're not bad, but that is what most of the people are interested in. What is the
Right.
best movie? What is the best camera? All that kind of stuff, and that is one level of needs. But as you get to deeper needs, you start looking at it, and the moment they start appearing in these networks, that's another indicator that they're now trying to ready for the market. Because why would you go to social media? There are two
Right.
reasons. You're not going there to find peers, because peers are found in your associations, right? So that is the other one. What is the industry? So if I take, so let us say, what is a market according to you? I mean, a definition of a market. Let's say I want to go to your market space. Why I want to be a big fish in a small pond, kind of thing. So let us say they pick any particular area. What according to you, say I want to go research this market space. What do you think consists of? I mean, what makes up that space,
Right.
right? And there was a, in pre-internet days, it was a magazine.
Yes.
They had an interesting thing, that a magazine survives mostly by advertisements. Okay, and people don't advertise unless they have at least 5,000 subscribers. I'm
Right.
talking about 80s,
Those
late
days.
80s, early
Yes.
90s kind of thing.
Yes.
And now, of course, everything is different, right? When you, so since they live by subscribers, since by subscriptions or advertisements, and they need to have a, all the free magazines available at that point in time used to live on this thing, or they'll used to get some small, very
Yeah.
small amount of money for doing this kind of thing. And if there is a magazine in that space, then that is a space, there is it is big enough for you to go, and at least there are some few
Right.
competitors there. That means there are few potential customers there. Somebody has already done research for you. You go into these magazines, and especially the ones that are recently started, and now it is their portals. The equivalent of it is portals, and go and start conversations with them and say, why did you start this, and what is the need, and whom are you trying to serve, and who is your typical customer, who is your user, and what is it. And they'll give newsletter to anybody because electronic newsletters are free, no
Right.
cost, nothing, just one click and it'll go. But they will automatically get filtered out after some time. And if I subscribe with a lot of enthusiasm to something, but I don't ever read it, you can track it and you can find out. Okay. So these first you find these locations like publications or portals or magazines or conferences or events or groups, Society of Competitive Intelligence. There is one for special librarians. There is one for computers in libraries. These are all the spaces where I have interest because they are intelligence professionals. It means who are gathering information all the time, and intelligence not in a intelligence in a very broad sense. Like I want to know what is happening in this field. What are the like
Right.
top five trends, and how is the economy going to be after COVID, if there is an after COVID? How is it? What are the industries that is going to bloom? Where are the job opportunities? What are the new skill sets required? Where will there be demand in early detection? Devices, all that kind of stuff. You get all the so you look at these leading indicators, and then you look for validation of these leading indicators.
Right.
And the validation of leading indicators are pilots being done in large number of companies. And I think I mentioned this in one of our conversations, is that 3 years ago I was looking at a blockchain, and then we were doing some research because there's a friend of mine who was trying to seed fund a company, and that was trying to do accelerator for blockchain because it
Hmm.
was very compute heavy at that point in time. And then we were looking at it, and when will the need for this be, when will it arise, so that they can start building this kind of thing. Then when I went and looked around, all I could find was financial institutions, cryptocurrencies, and
Right.
but of course now it's like it's very different, right? Now it's uh, the ledgers, and there are all these distributed ledgers, and there are other aspects of blockchain which even governments are using. They're thinking about experimenting with lots of interesting things. And so there will be some core technology. Initially, you can get excited and jump into the technology, and it will be a little early. But we start watching who's using what aspects of the technology are useful, what are not, and you can start with the gardeners and the foresters kind of thing because they are constantly talking to all the people.
Right.
But they also have a kind of a uh, to be mentioned in Gartner, you have to be of a certain state, right? Some two guys in a garage may not get covered in Gartner.
Right.
So either you have done something and got funded and become visible. So unless like being covered in New York Times or the Hindu or something like that, right? Some Chota magazine, some Adyar Times may write about you, but for Hindu to write, you have to go through a lot of, you have to get to some level, right?
Right.
So you get very local magazines, and and hyper local publications. What are the mentions and all these, like, because they're shining stars in that region, and
Right.
they want to give local regional news kind of thing. So we talked about micro niche, and
Yes.
this is exactly the way you go and find out. And you kind of start digging deeper. You start with a very, of course, top down. Um, the more established ones will have things like ontologies. Somebody would have predefined saying this is the structure and
Right.
the vocabulary and all that kind of stuff and all that sort of stuff. But the less established ones, where there is a lot of still skirmishes going on, people trying to establish themselves as the leader, and and they come and argue in panels, and make cases. And of course nowadays nobody argues, everybody is polite, and there's no firefighting or like no big debates kind of thing. But
Right.
there are lots of interesting things that are going on, some very heavy Twitter threads. And so this is where they help. Twitter is becoming a kind of a new search engine
Hmm.
for finding these things, because you can find the vocabulary. If there is nothing happening on Twitter, I would not, I would not even pay attention to it right now. Previously, it used to be RSS feeds and blogs. But RSS feeds, for some reason or the other, have not taken off, and many of them discontinued their
Right.
this thing. So um, you don't go to one place; you go to different places to collect this information. So the tools are the same. The tools are web scrapers. There is something called robotic process automation tools. There are some open
Hmm.
source tools. There are some heavily priced tools which let you dig deeper. Um, then there are these many of these uh, large sources of information like Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, all of them. They also give you an API that is a programming interface. So
Right.
people can go and program, and gather the information. This is like valid legal way. They give you certain amount of searches free requests, and then you have a paid version kind of stuff. And when you're prototyping, you can do a lot of searches fairly
Right.
free. Google search engine also, there is a API that you can take it and then use it. And same thing with Bing and others. So these are the tools at a broad level. At a
Right.
narrower level, these tools will also bring in a lot of noise. So along with the signal, somewhere there is weak signal here and there, and there's a lot of noise. So there is a next generation is a less lot of filtering tools. So you apply your own filters. What you do is you find the authorities in a field, which are and they can you'll easily see them, not because of just followers kind of stuff, because of the uh, weight given to what they say.
Right. Right.
So if and I also noticed that when I actually put a commentary on an article that somebody else has written, let's say on in AI or something like that,
Hmm.
I get a certain number of views, likes. LinkedIn does a great job of even parsing is where people look, what are the job positions, job titles, and all that. Very very useful information, and that is the one of the reasons why I keep posting on LinkedIn. But I notice that whenever I put something that is very personal experience, like for example, you talk to your client and they have this very specific marketing problem, which cannot be solved by any conventional tools that we know,
Right.
and you brainstorm with them and you solve it and you abstract that information because there will be confidentiality on the method that you used to do and share that, you'll suddenly see that your things will go into thousands. Or once I think about Anna Incubator, I posted something and there about within few days about 5,000 views of that, because then you know that. So one is that you find the sources,
Right.
then you find your filters to separate in the as much as possible the noise and get few faint signals. Then you look for validation of these signals, because
Hmm.
you also find out from there you can find other influencers, other experts in that space. Then you start looking at then you do a few tests, you float some tweets, some posts in that space, and see whether it catches. Because if you comment on a tweet posted by an expert, and if you can retweet with your own comment, right, which like sometimes I don't have anything to add, so I just wanted my readers or followers to see this,
Right.
so I just retweet it. But sometimes I also put a couple of comments on this kind of thing, and then when you see who are the ones watching it, and what is the velocity with which that information is
Mm.
propagating. So that is the dynamics. And so in the case of experts, the velocity of propagation is very high. The information that they put, like for example, I have these people. Right? In the case of startups, it is Paul Graham. You know,
Right.
it is Steve Blank. These are the traditional leaders who have been like done a lot. Like Steve Blank, managed so many, helped so many startups. Himself was in 8 different startups. Several of
Right.
them failed, and several of them succeeded. You know, Reid Hoffman, LinkedIn. Then he is the early investor in Facebook, and so when you start looking at these people who are early investors in these companies that became very successful, and then there are these authorities that are there, and they don't they don't no more they tweet for money, or they don't tweet for uh, you know with a lot of agendas, right? um, Sometimes they tweet to help the companies that they're mentoring or supporting kind of stuff,
Right.
but they're very very you can clearly find out, like if you look at 1,000 tweets and analyze it, you'll figure out which ones have agendas behind them and which ones do not have agendas behind them, because they're genuinely concerned about a lot of things that are happening in the space kind of thing. So for each one of these spaces, who are the, like, you need to start with about 10 of them. And then, and Twitter gives you an API that lets you go and find the list, which I mentioned, I think earlier.
Right.
From whom do they follow? And from there, you will find, sometimes they follow friends, right? But you can separate it out.
Yeah.
And that the way you do is topic alignment. You say that, okay, is the person being followed because he also blogs on this topic, or he also tweets on this topic, or they follow because it's one of their companies they invested in, they want to just keep track of them. Either way, you
Right.
get the information. So you have to make sure that you can't blindly take all that follower list and follow them too. So but the tools are there, and they're all automated tools. And if you don't find an automated, there are tons of automated tools. But if you find them too expensive, almost all the companies I deal with or an idea to prototype to getting their first customer
Right.
stage. They
Right.
can't afford even a $10 per month for anything. So for them, we give these do-it-yourself tools. We'll say, okay, you do these 5 steps and you get the information. Here is a simple way to automate it. What they have is time. I said, okay, hire an intern, teach them some Python programming or something like that. But now I think most of the college students are, and ask them to write a few scripts and extract this information, give it to you, and you take a look at it, and you can start from there. So that is,
Beautiful. Dorai, today's talk, well, I've become a student here and I've been busy taking notes because uh, the key part that I have learned is invisible influences. We get so enamored by the pomp and show and glamour
yeah.
that we don't look behind this glamour veil. So, well, invisible influencers, definitely agenda, is there an agenda or not? How do you find the vocabulary and where do you find it? Leading on to one of the parameters being the velocity of propagation of the message.
Yeah.
All leads to not just finding the right influencer and then looking at engaging and connecting and working with them. So, well, it's been a great half an hour, Dorai, and I'm looking forward to continue our Martech conversations again on the same lines, but delving a lot more into connections and tools and additional technologies.
Yeah. So next time I'll actually start giving you some demos of things that you can
Yes,
actually do, so that people will put it. Right now it's kind of a very abstract kind of thing. So
yes,
we'll pick one or two topics, and then they say, for this topic, can we find influencers?
super.
And so I'll end with a short story. You are the proponent of outlier marketing.
Yes.
So I said, okay, I need to help Pravin. Let me find out all this. He keeps talking about outlier marketing. It's a vague concept for me. So let me find out what it is. And I went and searched on Twitter. And then I found like 3 tweets. And two of them are from you, some 2 years ago or something like that. Then I said, I have to tell this to Pravin. And then I said, then okay, there must be some synonyms for outlier marketing. So let me find out what are the other kinds of things and all that. So when I'm researching technology in education, I start with something like elements of learning, and then suddenly I found these wonderful authors, 2 books. They talk on basic elements of teaching and basic elements of learning. And I said, when you start about building technology for education, you start with, hey, what is learning? And you start with something like this, because there is also now, when you say learning and type it on Google, you get mostly machine learning. What happened to the human learning part of it? So I said, okay, how do you find this kind of thing? And then there's a lot of information that you sometimes, unintended consequences. You type something, sometimes it's the wrong query, and then you suddenly find, so you be on the lookout. And so my one final thing is, when you go to your Google search, go to your setting and set the
Right.
results to 100. not
Okay.
20 by default. So whenever you do a search, at least look through the quickly scan through the first 100 results. Of course,
Right.
about 95 of them will be not relevant to what you search for, but there will be 5 to 10 gems that you will be able to find.
Lovely, Dorai. Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.